The desert highway was split open like a scar, and the convoy lay gutted across its length. Black smoke curled upward in jagged columns, smoldering tires sending out greasy coils that smeared the horizon. Humvees were torn to frames, trucks overturned on their sides like broken toys, and heat shimmer warped the edges of the wreckage. The air reeked of burning diesel and blood, thick enough to coat every breath with iron and ash. Jessie moved at the head of her Marines, boots crunching across glass and spent brass that glittered in the sand like broken teeth. Her gaze never wavered as she scanned the destruction, the outlines of bodies crawling from overturned vehicles, trails of crimson streaking across pale dust. A cracked windshield angled toward her caught the firelight, throwing jagged orange across her face as though the wreck itself were glaring back with fury. Radios hissed static and broken SOS calls, desperate fragments of voices swallowed in smoke. Her Marines hesitated only a moment. The battlefield pulled them toward panic, but Jessie anchored them with the steel of her presence. She raised her hand in a sharp signal, her tone cutting through the chaos. First squad, secure the ridgeline. Second squad, push with me into the wreckage. Keep your spacing. Eyes sharp. Even as words left her mouth, she was already moving, deliberate and uncompromising, braids swinging against her back as grit and soot coated her skin. Heat shimmer danced across the highway, hiding shadows that could be friend or foe. The convoy's ruin had become a death zone, the perfect place for enemies to watch from the ridges, rifles trained on the helpless. Survivors crawled through wreckage, some dragging themselves through fire with bare hands, some pinned beneath twisted steel frames. Jessie's eyes narrowed, picking each out of the chaos, mapping survival against destruction. Her voice tightened into the comms. We've got wounded. Multiple. Fire cover's thin. We move now. A Marine staggered from an overturned truck, clothes soaked in diesel, face streaked with soot. Jessie grabbed him by the vest and shoved him behind a smoldering wheel hub. Stay low. Hold tight, she barked, then motioned her squad forward. The fire snapped and roared, leaping from pools of fuel, licking at the broken steel until the air itself burned. Blood mixed with diesel under her boots, sticky and slick. Every step a reminder of the cost already paid. The atmosphere pressed heavy, a furnace of noise and light. Ammunition cooked off in bursts from destroyed vehicles, sharp cracks echoing like phantom gunfire. Marines flinched, but Jessie did not. Her voice snapped again. Steady. That's the Rex talking, not the enemy. Eyes forward. Fear loosened its grip on her Marines as they matched her steadiness, the chaos bending into discipline under her command. Every detail screamed danger. A tire smoldered at the road's edge, smoke trailing into the sky like a twisted signal. Glass shattered under her boots as she stepped past another cracked windshield, its fractured surface gleaming with firelight like a jagged eye. A young Marine to her right coughed against the smoke, his hands trembling against his rifle, and Jessie placed a gloved hand on his shoulder, grounding him. You'll hold, she told him, and he nodded, jaw setting hard as her resolve transferred to him like flame. She paused in the middle of the highway, letting the silence between cracks of burning diesel speak. Her Marines spread in a wide arc, the pattern of a leader who would not let panic erode structure. Smoke rolled across her helmet, the comms headset crackling as fragments of distant calls overlapped with static. She focused on one, faint and fading. Trapped. Humvee overturned. Can't. Fire everywhere. Jessie clenched her jaw, her eyes cutting toward the heart of the wreck. The desert seemed to hold its breath, the ruin itself waiting for her command. Fire painted the wrecks in brutal strokes, orange and black clawing across steel, while shadows stretched long against the sand. Her Marines looked to her, waiting for the anchor that would drag them from fear into action. Jessie drew in the air thick with smoke and diesel, tasting ash against her teeth, and her gloved hand tightened around her rifle. Her voice dropped low, steady in the chaos, words meant for her Marines alone. Into the comms, she whispered. We're going in. Nobody left behind. The first shot came like a whip crack through the smoke, snapping Marines flat against the sand. A tracer round screamed past Jessie's shoulder and hissed into the wreckage behind her, igniting a pool of spilled diesel. Fire leapt in a sudden line across the highway, chasing along the slick like a serpent of flame. The kill zone was alive now, enemy rifles from the ridgelines above turning every stretch of exposed ground into a gauntlet. Sniper fire. 3 o'clock. Suppress and move. Jessie barked, her voice steady despite the chaos. She pointed 2 fingers, signaling her flank element, and a burst of Marine rifles answered, cutting into the ridge with disciplined fire. Bullets cracked against steel, shattering another windshield. Fragments of glass cascaded down over a trapped Marine who screamed from beneath the twisted frame of his Humvee. Jessie was already moving, crawling low, dragging herself through dust and smoke toward him. The heat was unbearable. Burning tires sent oily black spirals into the air, blotting out the horizon in rolling sheets. The smell of blood mingled with fuel until it seemed every breath was poison. Jessie's gloved hands slipped as she grabbed the Humvee's doorframe, slick with gore and oil. A bullet struck the hood above her head, splintering metal into shards that rained down. Her Marines shouted through the comms, calling out targets, reporting wounded, the net alive with tension and urgency. Suppressive fire now, Jessie ordered, and rifles cracked in rapid bursts. Smoke swirled and tracer rounds streaked red through black haze. She shoved her shoulder into the bent doorframe, forcing it open enough to reach inside. The Marine trapped beneath was bleeding badly, legs pinned under the crushed dash. Jessie wrapped her arms beneath his shoulders and hauled, gloves tearing as twisted metal sliced through the fabric. Blood streaked her hands as she dragged him free, rolling him across sand already glowing with fire. "Dock here," she shouted, waving the corpsman forward, then turned back into the storm. Another line of fire crawled across the sand as Diesel caught, a wall of flame separating her from the next overturned truck. She didn't hesitate, dropped low and crawled through the heat, smoke burning her lungs, braid whipping across her shoulder in the hot wind. Her silhouette blurred in the firelight, a lone figure dragging Marines out of ruin with the relentlessness of a tide. The insurgents adjusted their fire. Bullets raked the gaps between wrecks, forcing Jessie's squad to hug cover, crawling from axle to axle, from tire husk to doorframe. Every move forward was paid in blood and grit. A round slammed into a windshield ahead of her, shattering it into a jagged spiderweb before the entire pane collapsed in shards. The Marine behind it flinched, crying out, and Jessie dove to cover him with her own body, sparks bouncing off her plate carrier. "Stay down." "You'll make it," she told him, voice low, commanding. She pulled him to his knees, half carrying, half dragging him across ground alive with tracer streaks. Dust and smoke swallowed them, but her will drove them through. Her gloves, already ripped, were soaked with blood and fuel. She ignored the sting, ignored the heat chewing through her uniform, ignored the hammer of rifle fire striking steel inches away. She moved with singular purpose, no Marine left behind. Another scream cut the air. Jessie snapped her head toward the sound, 2 Marines pinned behind a burning truck, one dragging the other but trapped under fire. She sprinted low, rifle barking in short bursts, rounds sparking off wreckage as she closed the distance. She slammed into cover beside them, nodded once, then pulled the wounded Marine's arm over her shoulder. On 3 were moving. They went on her count, ducking through smoke as her squad laid down another wall of fire. Every second stretched into eternity. The kill zone devoured time, every crawl, every pull, every lift etched into Jessie's muscles until it felt endless. Marines fired, reloaded, shouted, the chaos hammering into rhythm under her commands. Yet the urgency was a knife at her throat. Survivors were alive but seconds from being consumed by flames, and the enemy still owned the high ground. A burst of machine gun fire raked across the wreckage, bullets stitching through smoke. Jessie shoved her Marines flat, rolling over the wounded man to shield him. Firelight painted her silhouette against the wreck, sparks catching in her braid, her body the only barrier between the injured and certain death. She screamed into comms, "Gunner, kill that nest. Put them down." A Marine on the flank responded, his rifle barking steady, and for a heartbeat the fire from the ridge slackened. It was enough. Jessie dragged the Marine again, her gloves tearing wider, her palms raw beneath the fabric, blood smeared across her knuckles as she hauled him to the perimeter. The corpsman caught him, rolling him onto a stretcher, and Jessie spun back, chest heaving, eyes locked on the inferno still swallowing the convoy. For a moment, silence teased her, just the crack of fire, the pop of cooking ammunition. Then a deeper sound rolled through the battlefield, a groan of steel under pressure. Jessie's instincts screamed a split second before it happened. The wrecked transport truck at the convoy's center erupted, fire bursting skyward in a roar that shook the ground. A wave of sand and flame rolled across the highway, slamming Marines into the dirt, filling the air with grit, blood, and sparks. The blast turned day into hellfire, a reminder that time was burning away with every heartbeat. Jessie lay in the dust, helmet ringing, lungs burning, then shoved herself up on bloodied hands. Her voice cut through the smoke, fierce and unwavering. "We're not done. Move." Jessie crouched low behind the husk of a burning Humvee, heat rolling off its frame like a furnace. Smoke whipped past her helmet, goggles pushed high on her brow as tracer rounds carved red lines through the haze. Her squad looked to her, eyes wide, weapons trembling in their hands, waiting for the order that would carry them into the storm. She didn't hesitate. "Leapfrog, suppress, then push," she shouted, voice sharp as steel through comms. Immediately, her point team leaned out, rifles spitting controlled bursts into the ridge, the staccato rhythm hammering back the enemy's fire. Jessie tapped her second team forward, gesturing with a firm sweep of her hand. They rose and sprinted across open sand, boots pounding through a fog of smoke and dust, diving into cover behind the next overturned vehicle. Jessie followed, sprinting low as rounds cut the air inches above her head. She slid into cover beside a wrecked truck, its windshield cracked but clinging to its frame. Inside, a Marine slumped unmoving, chest heaving faintly, blood streaking down his face. Jessie swung her rifle butt once, twice, glass spiderwebbed, then shattered, falling like sharp rain across the Marine's lap. Reaching in with torn gloves, she hauled him out, her hands slipping on blood-slick fabric. "Got you," she muttered, dragging him free as tracer fire streaked overhead. She threw a glance at her team. Cover me suppressive fire answered instantly, brass casings spilling into the sand, glowing like embers in firelight. Jessie pulled the Marine across the ground, boots grinding diesel and blood into the dust until they became one smeared stain. The corpsman rushed in, taking the casualty, and Jessie pivoted back, already seeking the next fight. The insurgents pressed hard, sending bursts down from their concealed ridges. A shadow moved through smoke at her flank too close. Jessie spun, rifle snapping up, and put 2 rounds center mass. The figure collapsed, rifle clattering across steel. Another attacker lunged from behind a burning tire husk, and Jessie drove her boot into his chest, rifle butt slamming down across his jaw. He hit the dirt, and she didn't look twice before dragging another wounded Marine past his body. Radios spat static in her ear, clipped voices breaking through. "We're black on ammo. Need resupply. Contact left. Close 200 meters." The battlefield screamed all around her, ammo cooking off in the wrecks, popping like fireworks, Marines shouting, fire roaring as diesel-fed flames climbed higher. Jessie became the anchor in the chaos, moving from Marine to Marine, steadying with a touch, an order, a glare that cut through fear. "Stay in it. Keep firing. Follow me." She snapped to a squad, eyes hard with focus. They mirrored her grit, knuckles white on their rifles, determination etched on soot-streaked faces. Each time she surged forward, they followed, bounding in rhythm, leapfrogging closer to the wreckage still burning at the convoy's center. Shrapnel hissed through the air as another Humvee detonated, a wheel sailing end over end across the sand. Jessie was knocked down, glass shards biting into her arm. Blood streaked down her sleeve, darkening the fabric, but she ignored it. A corpsman reached for her with bandages, and she shoved him away. Later, move the wounded first. Her refusal was final leadership bought with her own pain. She pressed on, grabbing the twisted metal of another doorframe, gloves tearing wider as jagged edges sliced through leather. She grunted, forcing it back, and smoke billowed out, thick with choking fumes. A Marine gasped inside, coughing, eyes wide with terror. Jesse seized him by the collar and yanked him out, hauling him bodily as shards of glass fell around them like a storm of knives. Suppress left ridge, she roared, and rifles cracked in unison, sending muzzle flashes stroking against the smoke-dark air. Her squad's fire hammered into the rocks above, forcing enemy shooters to duck. Brass casings piled around their boots, glowing hot in the sand, some catching fire where they landed in pools of burning fuel. The ground itself seemed alive, spitting, crackling, bleeding, and burning. Every movement was agony and defiance rolled into one. Jessie's braid caught sparks as she pulled another Marine through flame, strands singed at the edges but whipping with every move. Her breath rasped in her throat, lungs full of grit, but her voice remained sharp. Push forward. Keep moving. No one stops. She carried her Marines on her voice, every syllable steadying them, welding their fear into discipline. At the convoy's center, the fight closed in tight. An insurgent broke through smoke, rifle raised. Jesse fired point blank, muzzle flash reflecting in his eyes before he fell back into the flames. Another lunged from behind twisted steel. She swung her rifle like a club, smashing him across the face before sending a final round through his chest. There was no hesitation, no pause, only the rhythm of rescue and destruction interlocked. She staggered to the perimeter. Another Marine slung across her back, boots digging into dust turned black with diesel and red with blood. She laid him beside the corpsman, hand pressed to his wound, before grabbing her rifle and returning fire without a breath. Behind her, fire roared, vehicles burned, and smoke clawed at the sky. The battlefield's soundscape was madness, the snap of rifles, the shriek of rounds tearing through steel, the hiss of flames eating fuel, and the pounding of boots as Marines moved under her command. Yet, through it all, Jesse remained the constant, bleeding and burned but unbroken, dragging survival out of ruin with her bare hands. She knelt behind the rim of a wheel well, pulling her last rescued Marine to cover, his body limp but still breathing. Bullets hammered the steel around them, sparks bursting in her face. Her hands bled through shredded gloves, crimson streaking over blackened leather. She pressed the Marine down, shielding him with her frame, then lifted her head into the storm. Enemy fire still raked the wreckage, smoke still churned into the sky, and flames still fed on spilled fuel. The battle had not relented, but Jesse had secured another life from its grip. She raised her rifle, eyes narrowing, her silhouette black against the fire, a living promise that the fight was far from finished. The battlefield was still burning, but something had shifted. What began as chaos was bending into rhythm, Marine rifles hammering with measured bursts, each shot punching holes in the insurgent fire. Jesse moved through the wreckage, smoke rolling off twisted steel, her lungs scorched from the air, yet her commands cut sharp and steady through the storm. Her voice held the line when nothing else seemed capable of holding. Perimeter tighten up. Keep your arcs covered, she shouted, hands slicing the air as she pushed a squad into position. The Marines obeyed, setting their rifles across shattered axles and bent doors, forming a rough but resolute circle around the wounded. Brass casings lay thick in the sand, a golden trail shining against the dark stain of blood and diesel. Every Marine's face was dusted gray and streaked red, exhaustion in their eyes but defiance in their grip. Jessie staggered under new weight, a wounded sergeant slung over her shoulders, blood soaking down her back, scorching hot against the torn fabric of her uniform. She lurched forward, each step a fight against collapse, her scorched gloves slipping on his vest. The roar of a machine gun swept the ground around her, sand exploding inches away, sparks bouncing from her plate carrier. She did not falter. With a guttural cry, she carried him through flame and fire, dragging him into the shelter of the Marine perimeter. She dropped to her knees as the corpsman rushed forward, her hands trembling with fatigue, but she would not let go until the sergeant was secured. She stared at her gloves, leather burned, fabric shredded, blood thick in every crease, and clenched her fists until the pain steadied her again. Behind her, A column of smoke rose from the convoy's wreckage, curling into the sky like a black signal. For the first time, Jesse saw it not as a threat, but as a beacon, a marker for medevac. Destruction reshaped into hope. The insurgents knew they were losing the ground. Their fire became frantic, wild, probing for weakness. But Jesse's Marines no longer bent. Short bursts. Conserve ammo. Hold your ground, she ordered, moving from Marine to Marine, checking their rifles, patting shoulders, setting jaws steady with a word or a look. Her braid whipped behind her in the hot winds, sparks catching and dying against her soot-blackened armor. She became a living shield, her presence the axis around which the fight now turned. A desperate cry rose from the ridgeline insurgents charging downhill in a last attempt to break the battered Marines. Figures emerged through smoke and fire, silhouettes against the glow of wreckage. Jesse stood tall in their path, rifle raised, eyes unflinching. Hold the line, she roared, voice ringing across the kill zone. Marines answered with disciplined fire, rifles snapping in unison, cutting down the charge before it reached their perimeter. The air filled with muzzle flash and falling shadows, the attack dissolving into dust and silence. The moment stretched, then broke into ragged breaths and the steady clatter of brass falling into sand. Jesse walked the line, checking weapons, dragging new boxes of ammo into shaking hands, her presence steadying nerves frayed to breaking. Around her, the battlefield was painted in extremes, flames glowing against twisted steel, brass casings scattered like relics of survival, Marine silhouettes crouched tight against the perimeter. She was their shield and their rally point, her frame outlined in orange fire, commanding through presence as much as voice. Eyes up. Stay steady. They'll break before we do, she told them, her tone low but absolute. The firelight caught her features, smoke twisting behind her into the shape of a beacon, a symbol of survival where death had ruled. The Marines believed her because she made them believe, her resolve unshaken even as her uniform was torn, bloodied, and scorched. In the center of the perimeter, the wounded lay in rough rows. Corpsmen bent over them, doing everything they could with the supplies that hadn't burned. The air was filled with groans, whispered prayers, and the clatter of empty magazines hitting sand. Yet, within the circle, there was order, a fragile but undeniable structure, forged by Jesse's hand. Another burst of enemy fire cut the smoke, bullets smacking steel, ricochets whining past ears, Marines tensed, rifles snapping to shoulders, but Jesse raised her hand. Steady. Hold. Her voice carried like iron through the dust. The enemy's fire dwindled, a fading echo on the ridges. Smoke thickened overhead, twisting higher into the sky, carrying their survival up like a signal flame. She stood there, in the ruin of burning steel and shattered glass, gloves blackened, braids scorched, eyes steady. She was the anchor in the storm, the force that turned wreckage into survival. Around her, Marines held the line not because they had strength left, but because she had given them hers. Hold the line, she said again, her voice firm, her silhouette framed in fire. And as the battlefield quieted into smoke and silence, they did. The first thump of rotor blades rolled across the battlefield like thunder. Jessie lifted her head, soot-streaked face catching a moment of wind as the medevac birds broke through the haze. Their descent churned the smoke into a storm, rotor wash whipping firelight into spirals and driving grit into every exposed eye. Marines raised their hands, signaling, while Jessie moved forward through the gale, her scorched gloves streaked red, her boots grinding over brass casings glittering like coins in the dust. The helicopter settled low, tail rotors spitting dust into violent swirls. Jessie shouldered into the chaos, checking each casualty with her own eyes, gripping vests, pressing bandages, barking to the corpsmen. One Marine slipped off a stretcher in the turbulence, and Jessie seized him with burned hands, her grip iron despite the blood. She walked with him to the helicopter door, refusing to release him until he was strapped in, her gloves leaving bloody prints across the metal rails. Around her, The battlefield remained a furnace of memory tires still smoldering, windshields cracked and gleaming like scars, steel frames twisted into black silhouettes, yet the fire no longer felt like an enemy. The columns of smoke rising from the convoy bent skyward, curling into the evening like signals, beacons calling survival out of ruin. Jessie lifted her face into the smoke, the grit stinging her eyes, and let its weight settle across her shoulders as another Marine was carried past her into the waiting bird. "Count them," she snapped, and her squad leaders responded, their voices ragged but steady. Numbers came in one by one, confirming what mattered. The wounded accounted for, the dead retrieved, the living held tight in the center. Marines moved with a rhythm now. Fear burned out of them, discipline replacing panic. Their rifles were low, their faces hollow with exhaustion. But they drew strength from her steadiness, her refusal to falter even as her body carried the marks of fire. Jessie's braid lashed in the rotor wash, strands scorched, sparks still clinging to frayed edges. Sweat and soot streaked her face, but her eyes stayed sharp, watching every stretcher carried, every Marine lifted into the belly of the helicopters. She staggered once, her legs near buckling from the weight of fatigue, but caught herself with a hand on a shattered hood, her gloves, torn and bloodied, pressed against the steel, leaving smears like signatures burned into the wreck. She forced herself upright again. She had no permission to collapse, not until every Marine was off the field. The medevac crews shouted over the storm of rotors, waving for the next stretchers. Jessie moved faster, her voice cutting through noise like a blade. "Move him up. You help with the line. Don't wait. Keep flowing." Each Marine heard her above the chaos, each step steadied by the certainty in her tone. Even the most shaken straightened under her presence, gripping litters harder, forcing themselves through exhaustion. They mirrored the iron in her movements, her endurance becoming theirs. Brass casings littered the dust around her boots, scattered in trails that gleamed when firelight struck them. They lay among dried pools of blood and oil, fragments of the fight already cooling, a mosaic of survival left on the battlefield. Jessie stepped across them without pause, guiding another casualty toward the helo. Her gloves slipped on blood, and the Marine nearly fell. But she caught him again, teeth bared against the effort. She never let go, carrying him into the arms of waiting crewmen before turning back for the next. The sky deepened above, the sun smeared in smoke, light dimming into bruised purple. Still the column of smoke rose higher, twisting upward like a black monument to what had been lost and what had been saved. Marines formed the final 360 perimeter, weapons steady though their arms shook with fatigue. Jessie walked their circle, touching shoulders, meeting eyes, her presence binding them together like steel. "Stay sharp. Hold it," she said. And the order was more than command, it was a promise. The last casualty was loaded, the stretcher disappearing into the helicopter's red-lit belly. The birds rose slowly, rotors pounding the ground into a whirlwind, lifting the wounded into the safety of the sky. Jessie watched them fade through smoke, their silhouettes swallowed into the darkening horizon. The battlefield fell quiet except for the low crackle of flames and the distant groans of twisted steel cooling in the air. Jessie stood at the edge of the burning convoy, shoulders squared, rifle slung but her hands still clenched in fists. Her scorched gloves were blood-soaked, her uniform blackened and torn, her braid heavy with soot. Around her, smoldering tires marked the road, cracked windshields reflected fire like jagged mirrors, and brass casings caught the last of the light. Fire had turned from destroyer to signal, ruin into beacon, chaos into order. Her Marines looked to her, weary but steady now, their fear tempered by her refusal to break. She met their gaze, unyielding, her body battered but her will intact. Leadership wasn't about her survival. It was about carrying them all through it, about refusing to leave a single one behind. She had done that. She exhaled slowly, watching the smoke drift into the sky, carrying with it the memory of fire and survival. Her voice cut across the silence, steady as ever, binding the moment in iron. "We hold." And with that, Jessie's eyes lifted beyond the smoke, already set toward the next fight.